Well, I wanted to talk about the potential war between Greece and Turkey that's been heating up recently. It's a pretty important, ongoing story in world events. But yet again, today I'm forced to discuss the ongoing war here at home in America. Now, it seems like only a few days ago that the focus shifted away from Portland towards Kenosha, Wisconsin. But you see, Kenosha is a pretty small city, and so it's already been thoroughly destroyed. So there's not really much left, I guess, for the rioters to do there. I've been seeing a lot of very sad images coming out of there of buildings that are just in total ruin, just piles of rubble. You can barely see where the walls were. And so last night, things heated up again in Portland, and I don't think that things ever really calmed down in Portland. I just think that in relative terms, it wasn't as noteworthy. And some of you might remember not too long ago, there was an event in Portland where some right-of-center gentlemen decided to have their demonstration, and I got a lot of hate because I said that I basically felt like they lost. Their numbers were fairly small compared to the Antifa guys, and of course they eventually left, they say, because, they did what they came to do, and then they went home. But the way that it looked, the way that it was, the way that that the videos painted the situation, was that the Antifa folks wanted them out, and they chased them out. When these guys left, Antifa declared victory and said, we chased out the Nazis, they're gone. And I thought it was not helpful to their cause. It was not reminiscent to me of the old events that you used to see with the Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer, where they'd go and march into Portland and go and do their thing, and Antifa would go nuts, and then they'd leave. But yesterday, Saturday, I think that they made up for that. I think that the right-wing groups handled themselves very well, and I was quite impressed with what they did in Portland. Now, they started in, I can never say the name of the place, but it's like Clackamas or something like that. It's a suburb outside of Portland. They decided to have not an event where they go and wave signs and wear their little shields and things in the streets and try to avoid street battles and then get chased back into parking garages by Antifa. They took a different tact, and that was to have a not a boat parade, but a normal parade with cars, or mostly pickup trucks, which proved quite useful because you see, if you've got guys in the back of a lifted truck, that gives them a bit of height over the rioters because they were driving through Portland. Antifa knew they were coming, and they were surrounding them everywhere they went, trying to stop them, trying to block traffic, jumping in front of their trucks. And so it was good that they had, the high ground there, because, they had to be prepared for some mild combat. And no, you didn't see anyone that I could tell in the back of these trucks wielding rifles and pointing them at these people who were riding around them. They looked like they were just going for a very peaceful drive through the city, wanting to wave their flags or whatever, which is a pretty normal thing. That's how parades work. You normally want to parade down streets that actually have people. It's not that effective if you go and have a parade out in the country where nobody's watching you. And the whatever you want to call them, Patriot Prayer folks, are just general Trump supporters, because I don't believe that the event was necessarily organized by Patriot Prayer, but there were a lot of Patriot Prayer guys there because this is Portland, and that's where they're from. And these guys were able to effectively disperse most of the rioters as they approached them with mace, which I didn't realize that mace would make such a big spray pattern. I've never, really been in the mountains, so I've never owned bear mace or used it, but that stuff seemed to work pretty well. And that is a nice non-lethal way of dispersing these violent hooligans. Now, unfortunately, a rather tragic event occurred last night. As part of all this, an apparent Patriot Prayer member, based on his hat that he was wearing, was killed by an Antifa rioter. There is video of the shooting, and it does not look like it was self-defense to me. Now, you could say, well, you're a bit biased, because you were saying that Kyle Rittenhouse in Kenosha, that was self-defense, but now you're saying that when this Antifa guy kills somebody, it's not self-defense? And the answer is yes, because I watched the video. Now, we might get better video later that shows that perhaps this Patriot Prayer, Blue Lives Matter Trump supporter guy was doing something to threaten the life of this gun-toting Antifa folk, but I've yet to see anything of the sort. In fact, it sounds like you can hear them shouting at the Trump supporter guy, and Andy Ngo, he sort of translated that. It sounds to him like they're saying, hey, we've got a Trumper, and it does kind of sound like that, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that that's definitely what they're saying. I wouldn't have picked those words out myself, but once I read somebody else say, hey, it sounds like that's what they're saying, it could be. But either way, I think it's pretty clear that it seems as though the shooter was with the left-wing rioters, and the guy who was killed was very clearly a right-winger. He was wearing a Patriot Prayer hat, and he had a thin blue-lined American flag patch on his clothing. There's a picture going around of this guy dead on the ground, and I don't think I can link to any of this stuff by YouTube rules, so I'm unfortunately not going to. You're gonna have to go to Twitter yourself. If you go to Andy Ngo, has all of this, and of course lots of other people too that I was following, but that's the easy thing. Just go to his Twitter feed, and you'll see this guy. He's very clearly a white male. Wearing cargo shorts, dead on the ground, and there is a patch that's got the thin blue line on it. So he's very, it's visually verified that he's a right-winger. So if you are an Antifa guy prowling the streets of Portland looking for some fascists to kill, he's an easy target. He was isolated. Didn't seem to be any other right-wingers around him. Nobody came to his aid. And you have to be especially careful around these Antifa folks. You can't just assume that they're only going to shoot people in self-defense, in what we would call self-defense, because according to them, all their rioting is not aggressive either, because they think that they didn't start the fire. They're just lashing out against injustice, and they think that white silence is violence. And so therefore, if you have this white guy who's he's beyond silent. He's outwardly supporting what they consider to be evil, racist fascism. And so he definitely is a violent person, and so they would feel justified in killing a man like that. I've said it before, but these people want you dead. If you don't understand that at this point, then you're delusional. We are at a point in America to where it has become acceptable to murder your political enemies. This guy was not some lone wolf. He was not somebody who just sort of, was an extremist who was on the fringe of the Antifa movement or of the Black Lives Matter movement or of the left in general, because last night I could find nobody on the left who was willing to condemn this. In fact, at first, they, without proper evidence, obviously, decided to assume that this was a black man who had been killed by a white Trump supporter. Which just was nonsense. And in fact, they chased a white man into a gas station where he was trying to hide, and then tried to, break into the gas station and destroy it, as the clerk was very nervously calling for the police, who I'm sure never showed up. Luckily, these people did not go into the convenience store and murder the clerk and whoever was hiding in there, and whatever customers were unlucky enough to be inside at the time. They just smashed as many windows as they could, because it looked like this guy had tried to board up his place, but didn't get every window, and so they smashed every window that he did not board up. But again, this is how the mob operates. All they need is just, a very mild rumor going about to just worry them up into a frenzy. But eventually the mob came to realize that it was one of their own who had murdered a Trump supporter, a Blue Lives Matter guy, a Patriot Prayer member, whatever you want to call him, and they seemed ecstatic. There were people bullhorning that, you know, hey, a fascist tried to come into our city tonight, and we defended ourselves. We protected Portland. We persevered, and they were so happy and inspired. They were holding celebrations, you know, celebrating this guy's death. They weren't celebrating his life. They were praising the brave comrade who murdered this unarmed white man. In fact, you know, just about everybody that you saw in any of the videos last night was a white person. Because this is Portland we're talking about. And on Twitter, I've yet to see many left-wingers coming out and, you know, condemning this and saying that, you know, this isn't such a great idea for our cause to be coming out and killing people. The merriment is palpable. And this, you know, should make it clear for anybody who has not realized it yet that America is over. There is no America anymore. It's gone. It's a thing of the past. There is no one nation under God. In my opinion, there never really was. And the centralization of our politics and the nationalization of our media made that clear. People have started to realize over the past couple decades just how different we all are, and they don't like those differences. People are not embracing their differences. People are eschewing their differences. They resent people who think differently than they do. They do not believe that people who disagree with them have a right to live in this country. And so to the protesters, who at first were peaceful, and that's why I'm calling them protesters, there were people peacefully marching and chanting "Death to America" in the streets of Oakland, California last night. To them, I have to say, you know, you've kind of already gotten your wish. Sure, America's a dead nation walking, but we need to put it out of its misery. I agree. But America's pretty much already dead. You've achieved death to America. And it's not necessarily these people's faults. They are a symptom of this, okay? You wouldn't have, you know, bands of left-wingers running through all of these streets of our cities, wreaking havoc and whatnot, and shouting about how bad the country is, if America was not already a failed state. You know, if you care about yourself or your family, I really would recommend you do not voice your political opinions, unless you're a left-winger, openly, because it's just not worth the risk. You never know when somebody's going to turn out to be one of these psychopaths who seem to make up a significant portion of the population of this country, who believe in bringing death to their opponents, or at least you know, would hate you enough to try and do you harm in some way. You know, for example, if they were your boss, they would they would definitely fire you. If they were your subordinate and they were a woman, they'd probably accuse you of sexual harassment or something, whatever, just to hurt your life. They'd try and have your kids taken away. I mean, hell, look what they did to Kellyanne Conway. And I don't normally talk about, you know, the political circus of Washington, but you know, it's pretty clear that the New York Times went after her daughter and wanted to, you know, get evidence that would certainly hurt Mrs. Conway's family. You know, we've seen in some of these towns where the rioters have come through, people spray painting on the plywood that they put up over their businesses, you know, hey, kids live upstairs, thinking that the rioters then might think twice about burning the building down. They don't care. They do not care about human life. That should be pretty clear. I mean, they are, you know, even though a lot of them are dumb and don't know anything, a lot of them are actual Marxists, and Marxists don't really believe in the sanctity of human life. They believe in the material productive forces or whatever, some such nonsense. You know, turning back now to this shooting in Portland, it is interesting to me. And, you know, you can kind of say the same thing about what just happened with Kyle Rittenhouse, although to a much lesser extent. These shootings are being treated very differently by the media and by ordinary Americans than, say, that woman who was run over by a car in Charlottesville, which wasn't even necessarily a clear-cut case of murder. It was a guy speeding through a crowd and he hit somebody. It's not as overt as, pulling out a gun and shooting somebody and killing him. But anyway, after that whole Charlottesville fiasco, the media and ordinary people came out and condemned that universally on both sides of the aisle, saying, oh, this is terrible that somebody died, and every life is precious, and this is tragic, and all these things. And you didn't really have that so much. I mean, the media has been trying to do it with these three guys who were killed by Kyle Rittenhouse, but the right in America is not buying any of that, thankfully, because these guys were thugs who attacked the kid first. Oh, and I should correct myself, only 2 of them died. One of the guys just got shot in the arm. But then we move on to this case here in Portland, and the media is not upset at all. In fact, the New York Times wrote a story about it, and Mike Baker, who I believe was the author of the story, when he tweeted it out, said that a man was shot in Portland who was wearing a baseball cap denoting him as a member of Patriot Prayer, a known far-right group. Which is just, a disgusting way of poisoning the well. When that woman was killed in Charlottesville, nobody said, oh, this woman was a far leftist who, a far leftist was killed in Charlottesville. And so the media, what I'm trying to say is they're no longer playing the game of pretending that they care about every human life. And that, oh my gosh, somebody was killed, I'm clutching my pearls, this is so terrible. The media doesn't care anymore. They're making it, they're helping to normalize political violence. In fact, NPR's whole, big story that they just published about why looting is okay is a part of this, but it's not quite the same as saying that murder is okay. But murder is being normalized now. And so when that happens, you should expect more of it. Life is being degraded in the eyes of the American people, particularly when it comes to their, as I've said, their political enemies. Namely, this is a factor on the left. I think that right-wingers have a much more grounded sense of what self-defense means. And so, they can justify killing people within the context of defending themselves and not so much outside of that. But the left has a much broader idea of who should be killed. And when homicide is justified, and while the media is not yet openly endorsing the left's broader idea of justified homicide, they're not openly condemning it. And so people will continue to push the envelope because it is you're not going to be made a social pariah for killing your enemies. In fact, you're going to be, held up as some sort of hero, which this guy was last night by the mob in Portland. And the media will not come out and openly condemn you. The next step is that the media will come out and join in praising you once this gets normalized enough. So a few more people have to die before the media will come out and say that, hey, these Trump supporters had it coming because they voted for the wrong guy. And at that point, there's no turning back. People will openly admit that that killing their neighbors is just fine. And, people don't realize how quickly you can go from where we are now to something like that. I mean, I encourage you all to study the case of Yugoslavia. Now, in that case, that was ethnic. It wasn't over partisan politics because they didn't really have partisanship in Yugoslavia. It was a communist country. But people very quickly went from, living peacefully to, hey, my neighbor is a Serb or my neighbor is a Croat or something, and so it's okay for me to murder them because they're not in my club. People very quickly snap and decide it's okay to go door to door, knocking on your neighbor's doors and killing them for being, a member of the wrong team. And that, of course, would very clearly be a civil war of some kind. It's not a civil war in the kind that we had in the 1860s, but of course most academics would not consider the American Civil War to really fit the definition of a civil war. What seems to be on the horizon for us here in America is something more akin to the Spanish Civil War, because that was over partisan politics. Strongholds that were held by one faction or the other would persecute members of the other faction living there. Because this was a political thing, not so much a geographic thing, you did have supporters of each side deep behind enemy lines, just depending on where they were when the war started. And so, you might want to look at that in terms of folks and, Republicans living in blue states being under great threat, or if things get really, really bad, even Democrats living in red states being under threat. We're only a few steps away from that sort of a scenario really being possible. But I don't think it will be because of the political leaders we have now. We don't really have, certainly don't have a proper left-wing leadership that's actually in office to lead this sort of thing. And so it wouldn't be, the governor of California signing an executive order saying that, Trump supporters need to be rounded up and put into camps or something like that. Which actually would be very similar to what happened during the Spanish Civil War, in which the left-wing regime, which was competing to control the nation, they were, in terms of their actual policy, fairly tolerant of the opposition after the war started living in their sector. But what they did was they didn't protect them from the mob, and so the mob, the left-wing mob in Spain, who called themselves anti-fascists, would go and round up whatever fascists they could find and kill them. It was much more chaotic when compared to the right-wingers' more organized killing, in which the right-wingers had clear leaders, which eventually that clear leader became Franco, and they had a unified policy throughout their territory. You generally could know that if you were a left-winger living in the nationalist zone of Spain, you were going to end up dead. But if you were living in the Republican zone and you were a right-winger, it was a little less certain what would happen to you. And so we're seeing a similar pattern now, to where Democrats are allowing the left-wing mob, who occupies their left wing, certainly to the left of these elected leaders, they're allowing them to run rampant and commit these atrocities. Now, they haven't killed too many people yet, obviously, but the body count will start rising. So, just to clarify, I really would hope that things don't get as horrible as they were in Spain in the 1930s. That would be really stupid, because in the United States, we're not, neither political faction is going to eradicate the other. They just really need to go their separate ways. We need a more peaceful resolution than that. And ultimately, I don't think that either faction is strong enough to defeat the other, like the way that the left was defeated in Spain. So ultimately, I'm not expecting us to end up with some kind of like Francoist dictatorship after a bloody civil war in which left-wingers and right-wingers are massacred. But it's always useful to compare the present with past events to try and get an idea of what could happen in the future. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.